The red dust of Peronia swirled around David Walsh's boots as he stepped off the landing shuttle, his heart racing with anticipation. 3 months of deep space travel had led them here, to a world that pulsed with strange energy readings, yet seemed utterly lifeless from orbit behind him. 5 other humans emerged into the alien atmosphere, their breathing masks filtering the thin air, while their eyes adjusted to the amber light of Peronia's twin suns. Dr. Beth Miller clutched her scanner, its readings dancing wildly as she swept it across the landscape, while Robert Kim shouldered his engineering toolkit with practiced ease. "The source is definitely coming from those formations," Beth called out, pointing toward massive crystalline structures that rose like frozen waterfalls from the planet's surface, each one larger than Earth's tallest buildings, and humming with an almost musical resonance that seemed to vibrate through their bones. The team moved carefully across the rocky terrain, their footsteps echoing strangely in the thin air. Every few meters, smaller crystal formations jutted from the ground like musical instruments waiting for someone to play them, and when the wind passed through them, it created haunting harmonies that made Lucy Santos pause and tilt her head in wonder. "It sounds like singing," she whispered, her voice barely audible through the comm system as they approached the largest crystal structure. David noticed that what he had initially mistaken for natural formations were actually carefully crafted buildings. The walls were smooth and curved, covered in intricate patterns that seemed to tell stories through their carved symbols, and massive doorways stood open as if inviting visitors inside. The entrance hall took their breath away. Soaring ceilings disappeared into shadows above, while bioluminescent veins in the crystal walls provided a soft, blue-green glow that pulsed rhythmically like a heartbeat. Ancient murals covered every surface, depicting graceful, dragon-like creatures with delicate wings and proud bearing, their mouths open as if caught mid-song. "Look at this, Robert," breathed, running his hand along one of the murals. The carved dragons seemed to dance across the walls, their bodies flowing from scene to scene in what appeared to be some kind of celebration or ceremony, each figure radiating joy and purpose. Beth's scanner went crazy as they moved deeper into the structure, detecting life signs that flickered and wavered like candle flames in a breeze. Following the readings, they descended a spiraling ramp that led into the heart of the building, where warm air currents carried the faint scent of something sweet and comforting. The nursery chamber opened before them like a cathedral. Hundreds of alcoves lined the circular walls, each one containing what appeared to be sleeping areas, sized for creatures much smaller than the dragons in the murals. Soft padding made from some unknown material filled each space, and gentle lighting created pools of warmth throughout the vast room. But it was the occupants that made the team freeze in amazement and horror. Scattered throughout the chamber were dozens of tiny dragon-like beings, no larger than house cats, their scales a dull gray color that seemed wrong somehow, as if they had been drained of all vibrancy. These baby dragons huddled in corners and crevices, their delicate wings folded tightly against their bodies while their large eyes stared at nothing. They made no sound when the humans entered, showing no curiosity or fear, just a terrible emptiness that broke the hearts of everyone present. "They're alive," Beth confirmed, checking her medical scanner with trembling hands. "But their life signs are weak. Whatever these creatures are, they're not thriving." Lucy approached one of the smaller dragons, moving slowly and speaking in soft, gentle tones. The little creature looked up at her briefly, its eyes reflecting ancient sadness, before curling tighter into its makeshift nest and returning to its vacant stare. David studied the murals more carefully, beginning to piece together the story they told. The early scenes showed adult dragons in magnificent colors, their scales gleaming like precious stones as they soared through crystal cities and gathered in great choirs. Their mouths were always open, suggesting that singing was central to their culture. But as the story progressed, the dragons in the murals began to change, and their colors faded, their proud postures collapsed, and eventually they were shown lying still while the baby dragons watched helplessly from their nursery chambers. "Some kind of plague," Robert muttered, pointing to scenes that showed the adult dragons growing weak and silent. "Look how their mouths are closed in the later images. Something attacked their ability to make sound." The final murals were the most heartbreaking. They showed the adult dragons using the last of their strength to seal the babies in some kind of protective chambers, sacrificing themselves to ensure the young ones would survive whatever had destroyed their civilization. Beth discovered the stasis pods hidden behind concealed panels. Each chamber was designed to keep a baby dragon in suspended animation until the danger passed. But the life support systems had failed centuries ago, leaving the youngsters to wake into a world of silence and death. "They've been alone all this time," she whispered, watching as one of the babies tried to approach a broken crystal formation that might once have made music. The little dragon pressed its head against the dead stone as if hoping to hear something, anything, that might connect it to its lost heritage. The team spent hours exploring the facility, finding vast libraries of what appeared to be musical notations carved into crystal tablets, great halls that were clearly designed for acoustic performances, and instruments of impossible beauty that lay silent and unused. Every discovery painted a clearer picture of a species that had built their entire civilization around music and harmony. Without their songs, these baby dragons were not just orphaned, they were culturally starved, cut off from the very thing that defined their existence. As the alien suns began to set, casting long shadows through the crystal halls, David made a decision that would change the course of both species forever. They would not simply document this tragedy and move on. They would find a way to help these lost children reconnect with their musical heritage. The baby dragons watched silently as the humans set up their temporary camp in the nursery chamber, their ancient eyes holding just the faintest glimmer of hope. For the first time in centuries, they were not alone, and something deep within their genetic memory stirred with the possibility that music might return to their world. That night, as the humans settled into their sleeping bags, surrounded by dozens of tiny, silent watchers, Lucy hummed softly to herself. She didn't notice that several of the baby dragons had crept closer to listen, their gray scales showing the barest hint of color in the dim light. Dr. Beth Miller's hand shook as she reviewed the test results for the third time that morning, the harsh reality of what she had discovered weighing heavily on her mind. These baby dragons were not just orphaned or abandoned, they were literally dying from something she had never encountered before in all her years as a xenobiologist. The medical data painted a devastating picture. While the creatures appeared physically healthy at first glance, deeper scans revealed that their neural pathways were severely underdeveloped, as if crucial connections in their brains had never formed properly during their critical development phases. "It's like watching flowers trying to grow in complete darkness," she explained to David as they stood in the nursery chamber, surrounded by the silent forms of dozens of baby dragons who seemed to drift through their days like ghosts of what they should have become. Her research into the Parathi records had revealed something extraordinary. These dragons were not born knowing how to be dragons. They were supposed to learn everything through complex musical education that began while they were still in their eggs and continued throughout their youth. The crystalline tablets in the Great Library told the story of a species that passed down their entire culture through song, not just entertainment or artistic expression, but practical knowledge about hunting, building, flying, even basic emotional development, all transmitted through specific musical patterns and harmonic frequencies. Without these songs, the baby dragons were trapped in a state of arrested development. Their bodies grew slowly, their minds remained childlike, and most critically, their emotional centers never matured beyond the level of confused, frightened infants. "Look at this," Robert called from across the chamber, where he had been studying one of the broken musical instruments. The device was clearly designed to produce complex harmonic frequencies, but when he tried to activate it, only silence emerged from the crystalline speakers. The team had spent days trying to repair the ancient playback systems, but the technology was too alien and too badly damaged. Years of neglect had left the crystal matrices cracked and the harmonic resonators shattered beyond their ability to fix. Lucy sat quietly in one corner, surrounded by 5 of the smaller dragons who had begun following her around the chamber. They seemed drawn to her presence but remained utterly silent, their large eyes watching her every movement with desperate hope. "They want something from us," she said softly, careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten her tiny companions away. I can feel it when they look at me like they're waiting for something that never comes. Beth's continued analysis revealed the cruel irony of their situation. The baby dragons could perceive sound perfectly well. Their hearing was actually more acute than human hearing across a wider range of frequencies. But they had never learned to associate sounds with meaning, leaving them isolated in a world of noise without context. The breakthrough came when Robert was testing his repair work on one of the smaller harmonic devices. Frustrated by another failure, he muttered a curse under his breath, the harsh consonants echoing strangely through the crystal chamber. 3 baby dragons immediately lifted their heads, their scales showing the first color changes the team had witnessed. Faint streaks of gold appeared along their necks and wings, pulsing gently, like heartbeats made visible. Did you see that? Beth gasped, rushing over with her scanner to record the phenomenon. The readings showed increased neural activity in the dragon's brains, as if Robert's voice had somehow triggered dormant pathways. Excited by this discovery, the team began speaking more frequently around the dragons, testing different tones and inflections. They found that certain human vocal patterns, especially those with strong emotional content, could produce subtle responses in the creatures. Anger or frustration caused the dragons to retreat and their scales to darken, but gentle, soothing voices brought flickers of color and tentative approaches. Laughter was particularly effective, causing several dragons to creep closer with what might have been curiosity. But it was music that produced the strongest reactions. When Lucy absent-mindedly hummed a simple melody while organizing her equipment, half the dragons in the chamber turned toward her, their eyes brightening for the first time since the humans had arrived. The tune was nothing special, just a folk song her grandmother had taught her back on Earth. But something about its rhythm and emotional resonance seemed to reach past the dragons' confusion and touch something deep within their genetic memory. "They're trying to understand," Beth whispered in amazement as she watched the dragon's scales flicker with increasing intensity. "Their brains are actually forming new connections in response to the music." Robert began documenting which human sounds produced the strongest responses, creating a rough catalog of effective frequencies and emotional tones. The dragons showed clear preferences for certain types of melodies, gravitating towards songs that felt warm and nurturing rather than aggressive or chaotic. The humans found themselves naturally adjusting their behavior around the baby dragons, speaking more softly and using gentler tones. Even David, normally brisk and military in his manner, began humming under his breath while he worked. Days passed as the team continued their experiments, learning more about the dragons' responses and capabilities. Some individuals seemed more sensitive to music than others, with one particular dragon, smaller and grayer than the rest, showing remarkable reactions to even the simplest human vocalizations. Lucy named this little dragon Harmony, not out loud but in her own mind. The creature had begun following her, everywhere, and she could swear that its eyes held intelligence and personality that the others still lacked. But progress was slow and often heartbreaking. For every small breakthrough, there were hours of silence and vacant stares that reminded the humans of just how much damage had been done to these innocent creatures. The weight of responsibility grew heavier each day. They were not just studying an extinct alien species. They were the only hope for dozens of baby dragons who would die without proper cultural guidance. Yet the humans had no idea how to provide what these creatures truly needed. Beth's medical scans showed that time was running out. The dragons were burning through their remaining life force at an increasing rate, their bodies struggling to sustain minds that could not develop properly without the missing musical education. "We have to try something more direct," she announced during their evening planning session. "These creatures are going to fade away completely if we can't find a way to substitute for what they've lost." The solution, when it came, was both obvious and terrifying in its implications. If they could not repair the Parathi musical instruments or recreate their ancient songs, then the humans would have to become the dragons' teachers themselves. That night, as the twin sons of Peronia sat behind the crystal formations, Lucy made a decision that would change everything. She positioned herself in the center of the nursery chamber, surrounded by baby dragons, and began to sing. The morning light filtered through the crystal walls of the nursery chamber. As Lucy positioned herself carefully among the baby dragons, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. She had spent the entire night planning this moment, choosing songs from her childhood that felt warm and safe and nurturing. 23 tiny dragons had gathered around her in a loose circle, their gray scales barely visible in the soft illumination, their ancient eyes fixed on her face with an intensity that made her throat feel tight with emotion. She started with a simple lullaby, the same one her grandmother had sung to her during thunderstorms back on Earth. Her voice wavered at first, uncertain in the vast chamber, but as the melody found its rhythm, something magical began to happen. 3 of the dragons lifted their heads slightly, tilting them to one side as if trying to understand this new sound. Their scales flickered with the faintest hint of blue, like moonlight on water, and Lucy felt her confidence grow. But when she attempted to copy one of the Pyrathi harmonic patterns they had found in the crystal records, the result was devastating. Every dragon in the circle curled into tight balls, their scales darkening to an even deeper gray, and several made soft whimpering sounds that broke Lucy's heart. Too complex, Robert observed from where he stood watching with the rest of the team. They're not ready for their own music yet. It probably reminds them of what they've lost, Lucy tried again, this time with a simple children's song about sunshine and flowers. Immediately, the dragons began to uncurl, their heads emerging cautiously as they listened to the gentle melody and simple words. The breakthrough came when she started humming instead of singing words. The wordless tune seemed to bypass whatever barriers existed in the dragons' minds, reaching directly into their emotional center's harmony. The smallest dragon crept closer until it was almost touching Lucy's knee. Its scales began showing definite color for the first time, streaks of gold and deep blue that pulsed in rhythm. With the melody encouraged by this response, Beth began humming a harmony line, her voice blending with Lucy's to create something richer and more complex. 2 more dragons approached, their scales flickering with green and purple highlights. "They're learning," David whispered in amazement as he watched the baby dragons' body language change. Instead of the listless, defeated postures they had maintained for weeks, several were now sitting upright, their wings partially extended as if remembering how to be proud. The humans experimented throughout the day, trying different combinations of voices and melodies. They discovered that the dragons responded best to music that felt emotionally honest, rather than technically perfect, preferring heartfelt folk songs over complex classical pieces. Robert surprised everyone by revealing a beautiful tenor voice, leading the group in sea shanties and work songs that made the dragon's scales flash with vibrant colors. The baby creatures seemed to understand the communal nature of these melodies, pressing closer together as they listened. But it was when Lucy began crying during a particularly sad ballad that the most remarkable thing happened. Harmony made its first sound, a soft musical trill that seemed to echo Lucy's emotional state. The little dragon's voice was nothing like the human voices surrounding it. It was pure and crystalline, with harmonic overtones that made the chamber walls resonate sympathetically. But it was unmistakably an attempt at communication. "Did you hear that?" Beth gasped, her scanner beeping frantically as it recorded unprecedented neural activity in the dragon's brains. "They're not just listening anymore. They're trying to participate." Over the following days, more dragons began making sounds, soft chirps and trills that seemed to correspond with different human melodies and emotional states. They couldn't reproduce human speech, but they were clearly attempting to join the musical conversations. The team established a routine of singing sessions throughout the day, with different humans taking turns to lead various songs. They found that the dragons had individual preferences, with some gravitating toward lullabies while others seemed to enjoy more energetic folk tunes. Harmony became Lucy's constant companion, perching on her shoulder while she worked and adding its crystalline voice to her humming. The little dragon's scales now showed consistent coloration, a beautiful pattern of gold and deep blue that seemed to reflect its growing personality. The transformation was visible day by day. Dragons that had been listless and vacant were now moving with purpose, exploring their environment and interacting with each other in ways they had never done before. Some attempted their first flights, short hops from alcove to alcove that filled the chamber with the sound of delicate wings. Their movements were clumsy at first, but joy radiated from every awkward landing and tumbling recovery. "Look at their eyes," Lucy pointed out during one of their evening debriefing sessions. "They're not empty anymore, there's intelligence there, personality." Beth's medical scans confirmed what they could all see. The dragon's neural development was accelerating rapidly, with new pathways forming daily as their brains responded to the musical stimulation they had been missing for so long. But the most amazing discovery came when Harmony began teaching other dragons the trills and chirps it had learned. The little creature would approach a silent dragon, make its musical sounds, then wait patiently for a response. "They're passing it on," Robert marveled as he watched one dragon successfully teach another to make a specific trill. Just like their ancestors did, they're sharing knowledge through music. The chamber that had been silent for centuries now rang with a constant backdrop of gentle music, human voices blending with crystalline dragon songs to create something entirely new and beautiful. David found himself looking forward to their daily singing sessions more than any other part of his duties. Watching these traumatized baby creatures slowly remember how to be alive was the most rewarding experience of his long career. But challenges remained. The dragons were developing faster than anyone had expected, and their growing intelligence brought new needs and desires that the humans struggled to understand. Some dragons began showing frustration when they couldn't make certain sounds, leading to agitated pacing and scale color changes that indicated distress. They seemed to know instinctively that there was more to their musical heritage than what the humans could provide. "We're not enough," Lucy admitted sadly as she watched Harmony try repeatedly to produce a complex harmonic pattern, its scales flickering with disappointment each time it failed. "We've started something wonderful, but they need more than we can give them." The answer came from an unexpected source. While exploring the deeper levels of the crystal complex, Robert discovered a chamber filled with intact musical instruments, smaller and simpler than the ones that had been damaged in the main halls. These appeared to be teaching instruments, designed for young dragons to learn the basics of their musical culture, and unlike the complex devices they had found earlier, several of these still functioned perfectly. When Robert brought one of the small crystalline instruments back to the nursery chamber, the effect was immediate and dramatic. Every dragon in the room turned toward the device, their scales blazing with colors more vivid than anything the humans had yet seen. Harmony approached the instrument cautiously, then placed one tiny paw on its activation surface. The chamber filled with pure, haunting music that was unmistakably Perathian origin, yet somehow familiar to human ears. For the first time since their arrival, the baby dragons began to sing in their own language. Hesitant at first, then with growing confidence as genetic memories awakened and found voice. The humans stood in awed silence as dozens of crystalline voices joined together in harmony, creating music that bridged the gap between two species and offered hope for a future neither could have imagined alone. The transformation of the crystal nursery into a living concert hall happened gradually over the following weeks. As more humans arrived from the colony ship and threw themselves into the unprecedented project of raising an alien species through music, Dr. Sarah Webb, the colony's chief linguist, spent her days hunched over the crystalline tablets trying to decode the emotional meanings behind Parathi musical notation. Each symbol seemed to represent not just a note or rhythm, but complex feelings and concepts that had no direct human equivalent. Meanwhile, engineer Michael Torres worked with a team of volunteers to construct better resonance chambers throughout the complex, installing human-made speakers and amplifiers that could blend seamlessly with the ancient Parathi acoustics. The baby dragons had grown noticeably larger in just a few short weeks, their bodies stretching and filling out as proper nutrition combined with musical stimulation to unlock their delayed development. But more importantly, their personalities were emerging with startling clarity. Harmony had become something of a leader among the younger dragons, teaching new arrivals the basic trills and harmonies that served as a foundation for more complex communications. The little dragon's scales now shimmered with a permanent golden hue, marked with intricate blue patterns that seemed to shift. With its emotions, Lucy found herself officially appointed as the head of what the colonists had started calling the Dragon Choir Project. Every morning, She would lead groups of volunteers in singing sessions designed to help different age groups of dragons develop their vocal abilities. The older dragons, those who had been in stasis the longest, required gentler approaches. Their voices were more developed, but their trauma ran deeper, and they often retreated into silence when reminded too strongly of their lost heritage. But the younger ones, especially those who had been awakened more recently, threw themselves into the musical education with enthusiasm that both delighted and exhausted their human teachers. Robert had discovered that different dragons responded to different human musical traditions. Some preferred the complex harmonies of classical music, while others gravitated toward the rhythmic patterns of folk songs or the emotional intensity of blues and spirituals. It's like they're each finding their own musical personality, he explained to David during one of their progress meetings. Just like human children, they have individual preferences and talents. The breakthrough came when Lucy realized they needed to stop thinking of this as teaching dragons to sing human songs and start thinking of it as creating an entirely new musical language that both species could share, working with harmony as her primary collaborator. She began developing hybrid melodies that incorporated both human emotional expression and the crystalline harmonic structures that seemed hardwired into Peronia genetics. The first successful hybrid song emerged during a particularly emotional evening session. Lucy had been humming a simple melody about home and belonging when harmony joined in with complementary harmonics that seemed to elevate the human tune into something transcendent. Other dragons quickly picked up the pattern, adding their own variations and embellishments until the entire chamber rang with music that belonged fully to neither species, yet somehow expressed the deepest truths of both. Dr. Webb made a crucial discovery when she realized that the Peronia musical notation wasn't just recording songs. It was encoding complex emotional and psychological states that were essential for proper dragon development. They don't just sing for entertainment, she explained excitedly to the assembled research team. Their music carries everything from basic life skills to complex philosophical concepts. It's like their entire education system was based on musical transmission. This revelation led to a systematic effort to create human dragon song cycles that could provide the psychological and educational foundation the baby dragons needed to develop into healthy adults. Teams of educators worked with dragon groups to develop musical curricula covering everything from basic social behavior to complex problem-solving skills. And amazingly, the dragons seemed to absorb these lessons through song far more effectively than through any other method. The most remarkable change was in the dragons' physical development. Those who had been participating in the musical education program were growing faster and stronger than anyone had expected, their wings developing the strength needed for sustained flight, and their cognitive abilities expanding rapidly. Harmony was the first to achieve powered flight, soaring around the nursery chamber with grace that took the human's breath away. But more importantly, the little dragon had begun demonstrating problem-solving abilities that suggested intelligence approaching human levels. The success of the program attracted attention from across the colony, and soon the dragon nursery had become the most popular destination for off-duty workers looking for a meaningful way to spend their time. Children from the human families were especially effective as dragon teachers, their natural playfulness and lack of self-consciousness making them ideal partners for the youngest dragons who were just beginning to find their voices. 8-year-old Emma Chen became particularly close to a group of tiny dragons who had recently emerged from stasis. Her games of musical hide-and-seek helped the baby creatures develop both their vocal abilities and their spatial reasoning skills. But the project faced its first major crisis when corporate surveyors arrived from Earth. Drawn by reports of the planet's rich crystalline formations and valuable mineral deposits, David found himself in increasingly tense negotiations with representatives from Stellar Mining Consortium, who seemed to view the dragons as an interesting curiosity that shouldn't interfere with serious resource extraction. "These formations you're so concerned about protecting," explained Corporate Director James Park during a heated meeting in the makeshift human settlement, "represent enough rare earth minerals to power Earth's expansion for the next century." The mining ships that followed were massive automated affairs, designed to strip mine entire continents with ruthless efficiency. Their arrival sent shockwaves through both the human colony and the dragon population, the baby dragons. Now adolescents with fully developed empathic abilities could sense the threat these machines represented. Their songs took on urgent, warning tones that made the crystal formations throughout the complex resonate with alarm. Lucy found Harmony, perched on her shoulder, the dragon's scales flickering through rapid color changes that clearly indicated distress. When she tried to comfort her companion with gentle humming, the dragon responded with complex harmonies that seemed to carry meaning beyond simple emotional expression. Dr. Webb worked frantically to translate what appeared to be the first true attempt at detailed communication from the dragons. The patterns Harmony was singing seemed to describe the relationship between the dragons, their crystal environment, and something much larger and more important than anyone had realized. The revelation came just as the mining ships began their preliminary scans of the planet's surface. The dragons weren't just living in the crystal formations. They were part of an integrated ecosystem that maintained the planet's ecological balance through harmonic resonance. The ancient Parathi hadn't just built their civilization around music for cultural reasons. Their songs were literally keeping their world alive, maintaining stable weather patterns and geological activity through acoustic manipulation of the planet's natural frequencies. Without the dragon songs, Peronia was slowly dying, and the mining operations would complete the destruction that the plague had started centuries ago. As the corporate ships prepared to begin excavation, the colonists faced an impossible choice: allow the mining that would fund human expansion throughout the galaxy, or protect a fragile ecosystem that depended on music to survive. The decision ultimately came down to a single question: had humanity traveled across the stars to repeat the same mistakes that had nearly destroyed Earth? Or were they ready to become something better? 6 months had passed since the first tentative notes echoed through the crystal nursery, and the transformation of both species had exceeded everyone's wildest expectations. The chamber that had once held silent, dying creatures now pulsed, with vibrant life and music that seemed to breathe with the planet itself. Harmony had grown to nearly the size of a large dog, its scales now displaying intricate patterns of gold and blue that shifted constantly with its emotions and thoughts. But more remarkable than its physical growth was the intelligence that blazed behind its ancient eyes. The dragon had learned to communicate complex ideas through musical phrases, creating elaborate song conversations with Lucy that covered everything from abstract philosophical concepts to detailed descriptions of what it remembered from genetic memory. "Listen to this," Lucy called excitedly to the research team as she sat cross-legged in the center of the chamber, surrounded by dozens of adolescent dragons whose scales created a living rainbow of colors. Harmony perched on her shoulder and began singing an intricate melody that seemed to tell a story. Other dragons joined in at specific points, their voices weaving together to create a musical narrative that was unmistakably sophisticated communication. Dr. Webb had finally cracked enough of the Parathi musical language to provide rough translations. This particular song story described the ancient relationship between the dragons and their planet, explaining how their voices had once maintained the delicate balance of atmospheric and geological systems. But the dragons weren't just remembering their past. They were creating something entirely new by combining their ancestral knowledge with human musical traditions and emotional expressions. The hybrid songs that emerged from these collaborations were hauntingly beautiful, carrying melodies that human ears found familiar, yet harmonics that touched frequencies beyond normal human perception. Robert had documented over 200 distinct song types that the dragons had developed, each serving different purposes from basic communication to complex technical information. Some songs could convey mathematical concepts, while others seemed designed to induce specific emotional states in listeners. The most remarkable discovery came when the dragons began teaching humans fragments of pure Parathi songs, ancient melodies that carried genetic memories stretching back thousands of years. These weren't just pretty tunes, they were functional tools that could interact with the planet's crystalline structures in ways that bordered on the miraculous. When Emma Chen learned to sing a simple Parathi growing song, the plants in the nursery chamber responded by blooming more vibrantly. When Michael Torres mastered a harmony designed for crystal resonance, He found he could tune the acoustic properties of entire rooms just by humming. But it was the discovery of the dragon's telepathic abilities that truly changed everything. Not telepathy in the science fiction sense of reading minds, but a form of empathic resonance that allowed them to share emotions and experiences through their songs. Harmony had been the first to demonstrate this ability, somehow conveying to Lucy the exact sensations of flight and the joy of soaring through crystal canyons. The experience left Lucy breathless and dizzy, but filled with a profound understanding of what it meant to be Peronia. Other dragons quickly developed similar abilities, creating a network of emotional communication that gradually began to include their human companions. Suddenly, the barriers between species seemed less important than the connections they were building together. The changes weren't limited to the nursery chamber. Throughout the crystal complex, dormant systems were beginning to respond to the return of Peronia songs, lighting up passages and chambers that had been dark for centuries. Ancient atmospheric processors hummed to life, clearing the air and regulating temperature with precision that human technology couldn't match. Water purification systems activated, providing clean drinking water that tasted better than anything the colonists had experienced. Most importantly, the planet itself seemed to be responding. Weather patterns that had been chaotic and destructive for centuries began stabilizing, and the frequent earthquakes that had plagued the region subsided into gentle rhythms. Dr. Webb's research revealed that the Peronia had literally designed their world to function as a massive musical instrument, with geological formations and atmospheric currents all tuned to respond to specific harmonic frequencies. They didn't just live on this planet, she explained in amazement. They turned it into a living symphony. Every mountain range, every crystal formation, every weather pattern was part of an integrated acoustic system. The implications were staggering. With proper guidance, humans could learn to participate in this planetary music, helping to maintain and even improve the ecological balance that the dragon's ancestors had established. But this revelation came at a critical moment. The corporate mining ships had completed their preliminary surveys and were preparing to begin full-scale excavation operations. Director Park had grown increasingly impatient with what he saw as scientific delays, dismissing the dragons as an interesting but irrelevant discovery that shouldn't interfere with serious business. "You're talking about abandoning the most valuable mining operation in human history because of some singing lizards," he argued during the heated confrontation with David and the research team. The dragons, now capable of understanding human speech through their empathic abilities, responded to this threat with songs of such haunting beauty and desperate urgency that even the corporate security teams found themselves moved to tears. Harmony approached Director Park directly, its scales shifting through patterns of gold and deep blue as it sang a melody that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. The song told the story of a species that had lost everything, of children growing up in silence, of a world slowly dying without the music that gave it life for a moment. The corporate director seemed affected by the dragon's plea. His expression softened and his hand reached out tentatively toward Harmony's extended wing. But the moment passed, and Park stepped back with a shake of his head. "I'm sorry, but I have shareholders to answer to. Mining operations begin tomorrow." That night, as the colonists gathered in the crystal chamber for what might be their last peaceful evening, the dragons began singing something entirely new, a song that seemed to call out beyond the confines of the nursery, reaching into the deep places of the planet itself. The crystal formations throughout the complex began resonating in harmony, their combined voices creating music that grew stronger and more complex with each passing moment. Lucy felt Harmony's weight on her shoulder and heard the dragon's voice join the planetary chorus. But this time, the song was not one of mourning or loss. It was a song of awakening, calling to systems and structures that had slept for centuries, preparing for something that would change the fate of two worlds forever. As the mining ships powered up their excavation equipment in the distance, the very ground beneath the human settlement began to sing in response. The dawn of Peronia's twin suns painted the crystal formations in shades of amber and gold as the massive mining ships took their positions above the planet's most valuable mineral deposits. Director Park stood on the command deck of the lead vessel, watching his automated excavators prepare to begin operations that would strip away millennia of geological artistry. Far below, in the heart of the crystal complex, something unprecedented was taking shape. Every human colonist had gathered in the great resonance chamber alongside hundreds of dragons whose scales blazed with colors that had never existed before this moment. Harmony perched on Lucy's shoulder. No longer the tiny gray creature they had first discovered, the dragon had grown into a magnificent being whose wingspan nearly matched Lucy's height, its scales displaying intricate patterns that seemed to tell the story of two species learning. "To become one, are you ready?" Lucy whispered to her companion, feeling the dragon's musical response vibrate through her bones. The melody that answered her was complex beyond human understanding, yet somehow she knew it meant hope, determination, and love that transcended the boundaries between worlds. Dr. Webb had worked through the night to coordinate what they were calling the Great Song, a planetary-scale composition that would demonstrate once and for all the true value of what the mining ships threatened to destroy. Every person in the chamber held a crystal resonator tuned to amplify their voice. While the dragons had positioned themselves at key acoustic points throughout the complex, the ancient Parathi architects had designed this space to focus and project sound across entire continents. David checked his communication equipment one final time, knowing that what happened in the next few minutes would determine the future of human expansion into the galaxy. They were either about to save a world or watch it die high above. The mining ships began their descent toward the largest crystal formations, their drilling arrays spinning up to temperatures that could melt through solid rock. Park had made it clear that no amount of protest would stop the operation. The first note came from the smallest dragons, their crystalline voices creating a foundation of pure harmony that seemed to emerge from the planet itself. The chamber walls began to glow as ancient acoustic systems awakened to amplify and direct their song. Human voices joined the melody. As families sang together, their children's clear tones blending with adult harmonies to create something that was both utterly human and completely beyond anything Earth had ever produced. Lucy began the central melody, a song that told the story of two species finding each other across the void of space and learning that survival sometimes meant becoming something greater than what you started. As Harmony's voice soared above the human chorus, carrying harmonics that made the crystal formations throughout the complex pulse with bioluminescent rhythms, other dragons added their own variations, creating a musical conversation that spanned species and spoke of unity forged through understanding. The song grew in complexity as more voices joined, each adding their own cultural traditions and emotional truths to the planetary symphony. Irish ballads blended with African rhythms, while dragon genetic memories contributed melodies that predated human civilization. But this was more than just beautiful music. As the combined voices reached critical harmonic frequencies, the planet itself began to respond in ways that took everyone's breath away. Crystal formations across entire continents lit up like neural networks, creating visible connections between distant mountain ranges and underground cavern systems. The aurora-like displays could be seen from orbit as Peronia's magnetic field synchronized with the acoustic patterns weather systems that had been chaotic for centuries suddenly organized into elegant spiral patterns, with winds and currents flowing in harmony with the music rising from the surface. Temperature fluctuations stabilized, creating perfect atmospheric conditions across vast regions. Most dramatically, the geological instabilities that had plagued the planet for generations settled into gentle, rhythmic pulses that matched the tempo of the great song. What had been random earthquakes became a planetary heartbeat. On the mining ships, alarm systems screamed warnings as their sensors detected energy patterns unlike anything in human experience. The crystal formations they had come to harvest were broadcasting signals on frequencies that interfered with every piece of electronic equipment. Director Park stared in disbelief at displays showing the entire planet transforming into what could only be described as a living instrument. The mineral deposits his ships had come to extract were revealed as crucial components in a planetary acoustic system of unimaginable sophistication, sir, his chief geologist reported in a shaking voice. If we remove these crystals, the entire planetary ecosystem will collapse. The geological stability, the weather patterns, everything depends on the harmonic resonance. But the full revelation came when Harmony began singing a melody that seemed to reach directly into space. Within minutes, every human ship in the system was receiving the signal, a song of such transcendent beauty that it brought tears to the eyes of hardened space miners. The dragons had learned to broadcast their music beyond the confines of their world, sending messages that carried not just sound but the emotional and cultural content that made them who they were. Corporate executives on distant Earth received recordings of the great song and found themselves weeping for reasons they couldn't explain. The music conveyed experiences of loss and recovery, of finding family among strangers, of worlds that could thrive when different species chose cooperation over exploitation. Public opinion shifted overnight as the recordings spread through human space. Suddenly, the mining operation on Peronia became a symbol of humanity's choice between its destructive past and a future built on harmony with other forms of life. The mining ships retreated without firing a shot, their crews requesting permission to remain in orbit as observers rather than extractors. Many of the miners asked to join the colony permanently, drawn by the promise of participating in something unprecedented. Director Park himself resigned his corporate position and requested asylum on Peronia, admitting that hearing the great song had fundamentally changed his understanding of what constituted true wealth. The immediate crisis passed, but the real transformation was just beginning. Word of the singing planet spread throughout human space, attracting scientists, artists, and philosophers who wanted to study and participate in the first successful interspecies civilization. The dragons, now fully mature and confident in their abilities, became teachers and ambassadors, sharing their knowledge of planetary harmony with humans who proved capable of learning. Some humans developed abilities that seemed almost magical, using song to influence weather patterns and geological processes. Children born on Peronia grew up bilingual in human speech and dragon song, becoming living bridges between two forms of consciousness that had found ways to complement, rather than compete with each other. The colony established itself as a center of learning and cultural exchange, where species that had developed separately for millions of years could discover what they might become together. Lucy found herself appointed as the first interspecies cultural ambassador, working with Harmony and other dragons to develop educational programs that could be shared with other worlds. Their techniques for bridging differences through music began spreading to human colonies throughout the galaxy. The crystal formations that had once been seen as mining targets became sacred sites where humans and dragons worked together to maintain the planetary harmony that supported all life on Peronia. Years later, when other alien species made contact with humanity, they found not the aggressive, acquisitive civilization that many had feared, but a culture that had learned to value cooperation and mutual growth over domination and exploitation. The great song continued to evolve, incorporating new voices and perspectives as the community grew. What had begun as a desperate attempt to save a handful of orphaned dragons had become a new model for how different forms of life might share the universe. And in the crystal chambers where it all began, human children and young dragons played together, their laughter and songs creating new melodies that drifted up to the stars, a signal to the cosmos that some bonds transcend species and create something greater than the sum of their parts. The baby dragons, who had once been silent and gray, now taught their own young to sing in harmonies that included human voices as naturally as breathing. They had not just survived the loss of their original culture, they had helped create something entirely new. Harmony, now an elder among its people, often perched beside Lucy as they watched the sunset paint the crystal formations in impossible colors. Their friendship had saved two species and transformed a world, proving that sometimes the most profound revolutions begin with a simple act of compassion. The singing never stopped on Peronia. It had become as essential as breathing, as natural as the twin suns that rose each morning over a world where dragons smiled and humans learned to fly on wings of music that carried them beyond the boundaries of what either species had ever dreamed possible.